Welcome to the Pharma Source podcast. It's 2026, and if you thought last year was unpredictable, well, get ready for the year ahead. We're checking in with Gil Roth, President of the PBOA, on the twists and turns that he foresees in the year ahead. Gil, welcome to the podcast for our annual catch-up. Not much going on, is there?
No, not at all. This is a nice, easy, calm time, isn't it?
Yeah. Just easing you in.
I do want to take umbrage with your statement, predictions, because no one has predictions, or anything anyone predicts is not going to come through.
Yep.
That and the term foreseeable future are things that I've really learned in the past year we need to just throw out the window. But I will do my best to talk about the industry and what's been going on.
At CDMO Live, I remember you saying nobody knows anything. And so you need flexibility and optionality. So that's well understood. There's an awful lot going on since we last spoke. We've got Biosecure Act signed into law, FDA hemorrhaging staff, while at the same time promising fast tracking of advanced modalities, vaccines being cut in many cases, and most favored nation deals being cut with tariff exemptions attached. So an awful lot going on. But I thought what would be useful is just to start to walk through some of those issues together, and very keen to get your perspective on what this means for pharma manufacturing and also for your members.
Sounds good.
So let's start then on the FDA. Keen to get your take on what's been happening there.
Well, a lot of the cuts that happened last year, first with DOGE, then with the early retirements and reduction in force that happened in February and then April of 2025, degraded the FDA, to be blunt. A lot of people were fired. There are varying numbers as to what the ultimate layoff and retirement numbers were. The commissioner keeps talking about the authority he has to hire more staff, and he's bringing on 450 people here, there, and the other place. But a lot of the people who left of their own volition were people with a lot of institutional knowledge at the FDA. Now, there's still a lot of great staff there. I'm working on the generic drug user fee authorization, or GDUFA reauthorizations. We negotiate that every 5 years along with several other user fee packages. And we're working with a lot of career staff at FDA, and there's still really good, devoted people who are there. But a lot of people left. And the atmosphere is not great when you have that sort of environment. The reported reason that the previous head of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, Dr. Pazder, quit 3 weeks into his tenure there after, I believe, 27 years at FDA, was that the commissioner wanted to fire a career FDA staffer who I'd worked with because she gave him the wrong answer in a meeting. Pazder refused to fire her. He quit or took retirement. She was ultimately reassigned to a division in which she has no background or experience. And things like that create bad morale at FDA. Now, as far as performance goes, the agency did seem to hold up pretty well in 2025 with drug reviews, especially on the new drug side of things. It's PDUFA goal dates, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. There's concern coming from a couple of directions. One is that a number of those user fee driven goal dates were extended by FDA. Instead of the 8-month or 10-month review to get a yes or a complete response letter, some of them had 3-month extensions added to them, potentially or possibly because FDA's review staff and infrastructure was not able to finish these drug reviews in time. Those also include inspections, and there's always been turnover at the inspectorate predating this administration. And so that's been a challenge to try to keep the inspectorate up to date, make sure they're tackling both the pre-approval inspections and the regular surveillance inspections they need to do. But the other concern regarding those new drug applications is a number of complete response letters that have been issued, which have been perhaps more ticky-tack, I'll say, than previous complete response letters, things that could have been handled with, some back and forth with the reviewers or the project managers and the drug applicants are now turning into complete response letters, which becomes another cycle of a drug review instead of just an extension. That's also happened within, as you mentioned, other modalities. Within cell and gene, there's been a number of drug applications that thought they were on a glide path for approval based on their ongoing meetings with FDA that have now been told, sorry, your clinical data is not usable and you'll need to conduct more trials, which becomes an extensive period of time before the drug can really go in for review. We've seen a couple of companies cite those changes to FDA policy based on what they were presented with under the multi-year path that they'd been going through their drug applications. That uncertainty can be a real problem. Everyone's concerned about, FDA staffing and manpower, but if the policies begin changing in terms of clinical needs, that affects R&D pipeline significantly. All of that trickles down to the CDMO space. It doesn't hit us directly, but if you were supposed to contract manufacture that cell or gene therapy product, and then you discover that it's going to be 3 or 4 more years before it gets approval, as a CDMO, that changes your business model very much too.
We're hearing about the FDA being more open to using AI when it comes to regulatory filings. Is that something which you've come across?
No one knows yet, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe there'll be some use of AI and machine learning when it comes to clinical data, trying to make sure that, weird safety signals aren't underlying certain data that, human reviewers might be missing. How useful it's going to be and whether human beings will be willing to sign off on any sort of approvals that a machine has done most of the work on. That's up in the air because someone ultimately has to be liable for drug approvals, which means a lot of people need to review everything that's being handled by machines. But I know the agency does very much want to use AI for a number of they want to revolutionize the way things are done, or modernize the way things are done at the agency through AI and machine learning. And there are certainly advantages to that will complement human reviewers. I think, again, in terms of safety signals, I think there are going to be aspects of the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls packages that can also, that use of machine learning may help, again, discover underlying potential issues or signs of quality that could be headed towards a problem so that companies can try to solve these before they become a catastrophic failure. So I know they're doing stuff. I don't know how much progress they've made because the entire AI field is so fast-moving at this point and, to be honest, over-promising in a lot of ways.
Yeah. There were concerns, weren't there, last year around ELSA?
Yeah, that was the internal chatbot. One of the issues that occurs to me is if you were using this to try to feed in drug applications so that you can review them more quickly, there are confidentiality issues when it comes to the customer filings. So it would be a question as to how much training a system could do on information that ultimately belongs to the filer and not to the FDA. So I don't know how, if that becomes a obstacle in terms of really trying to develop that ELSA service or system to be able to read an application effectively, if it can't be trained on things that are most applicable to it.
Yeah. Interesting times. You mentioned GDUFA. What's the timeline around those user fees at the moment? What do you expect?
Well, ultimately, the reauthorization has to happen by the beginning of fiscal 28, which means by September 30th of 2027, the package for the 4 major user fees that are coming up, PDUFA, GDUFA, both of which I've mentioned, the biosimilars one, BASUFA, and medical devices, MEDUFA. So it's publicly known because the minutes are out there. PDUFA and GDUFA are both being negotiated right now. BASUFA should be following after, I believe, because it's a lot of work and overlapping personnel would be handling both that, GDUFA and PDUFA. So, making sure there's enough resources to be able to do these negotiations is important. So yeah, we're working on those right now, trying to figure out ways to improve and make sure the program's sustainable for GDUFA going forward. I know the big trade associations in pharma and bio are both working on the PDUFA side of things. There's a lot going on, and understanding how the administration's policies are reflected in some of the proposals that have been made public is, part of what we're working on. And we're working with AAM, the Generic Industry Association, and the Bulk Pharmaceuticals Task Force to make sure industry interests are represented, and for my part, making sure CDMOs don't become overly burdened by GDUFA requirements and fees.
Thank you. Let's talk about vaccine policy. So obviously there's been an awful lot going on there, driven by RFK Jr. and how he's shaking up HHS. Chartered vaccines being dropped from 17 diseases to 11, $500 million in funding for mRNA, which has been cut. What do you think this all means in terms of vaccines, vaccine capacity that CDMOs built during COVID?
Well, a good amount of that sort of vaccine capacity is fungible for other sterile injectables. Thankfully, it's not like live viral vaccines, which you sort of need to contain within certain facilities. Messenger RNA, you can swap out and do GLP-1 products on the same sort of lines. You have to clean it, obviously, but that's not segregated capacity. I'll put it that way. At CDMO Live last year, in fact, a European CDMO came to me and said, we're opening a U.S. office. We want to be part of PBOA. I said, what do you do? They said, we make messenger RNA vaccines. And I told them, you should probably close that office for a couple of years. I'm going to be completely blunt about it.
Yep.
This administration with RFK Jr. running HHS is inimical to messenger RNA vaccines. There's a lot of misconceptions about that modality floating out there, and they have leaned into those. Messenger RNA is seen as risky in ways that I don't believe are true, but the upshot is they're the guys who are going to decide whether these things reach the market or not, and it appears they do not want them to reach the market. So we'll see how that stuff plays out. We just heard a day or two ago, I believe, that Moderna was cutting back on its mRNA vaccine research, given the shape of the U.S. regulatory system or regulatory framework that's out there. And that's not healthy, obviously, not just in messenger RNA, but for public health. These things could become real problems. One of the other areas that the administration, that HHS under RFK appears to be pushing, is changing liability laws for vaccines in the U.S., which could open up U.S. vaccine manufacturers to significant legal financial penalties. No one knows what direction that's going in, but that could certainly put a chill on vaccine development in the U.S.
It really is, and we don't need to dig too much into the politics of this, but I think just from a pure global health perspective, it really is terrifying. And it's not just in the US, of course. I mean, in the UK, where I'm recording from, the UK's just lost its WHO status as being measles-free because there's been such a rise in deaths because of this anti-vax sentiment, which is becoming a global problem. And it's such a shame with a modality like mRNA, which has been proven, couldn't have been proven better during COVID-19, that this is happening.
Yeah, it's... we say we don't want to talk about politics, but that's, inextricably tied to all this. And the in our case, the Make America Healthy Again influencer vibe, a subset of that has got this very anti-vax mentality. We just had the CDC's chairman of the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, ACIP, essentially spreading lies about vaccine safety on a podcast that ostensibly tries to both sides things, but it's not a good public health environment we're walking into right now. And you would think the lessons of 2020 would have taught us that importance, but some people took the exact opposite lesson and decided to go in a very different direction. And unfortunately, some of them are controlling the levers of public policy now. But that's not CDMO stuff. So
Yeah, but the impact downstream on capacity and facilities is.
it changes things for sure. Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago now, we hosted our External Manufacturing Leaders event in Boston. We brought together around 20 executives in biopharma, and we were talking about some of these issues around reshoring. And overall, it felt like the question that everyone was asking was, how do you actually implement that? If you're a biotech in particular, how do you actually reshore when there isn't the capacity to reshore to? And particularly, I think, in modalities like ADCs, sterile fill finish. What's your take on the current capacity gap, and how is that going to limit reshoring efforts?
Well, that's something we've tried to bring up with the administration, that there are different types of drugs, different things that you can and can't onshore, different business models that will permit that stuff. Large pharma can announce $50 billion of onshoring investment, and Lilly, for example, can announce 4 sites that will each cost, I think, $6.5 billion a piece, some of which may be geared to make only 1 or 2 ingredients for a product. The CDMO sector can't do that. That said, what we do is, as I've tried to get across to various parties in the government, what we do is a force multiplier. We make an investment of $50, $90, $100 million, and that's going to serve multiple customers, multiple modalities, and create a lot of drug supply. Within ADCs, now that's a really specialized space and a very difficult one to crack and to do well. It's, I don't go with the one-size-fits-all administration perspective of, if you are not building something here right now, all of your drugs are tariffed at 100%, which was announced and then mysteriously went away back in September of 2025. There's investment that can be made here. There are problems that I've talked about publicly in the past in terms of too many parties trying to invest in the U.S. simultaneously. If every major pharma is trying to build significant capacity at the same time, there's going to be shortages or at least bottlenecks in terms of equipment, workforce, the regulatory process to get these sites up and running, the workforce, which simply doesn't exist in the U.S. on this scale. There are a lot of issues when it comes to how do you build a full-sized pharmaceutical infrastructure again in the U.S. from all of these major companies, all of which seem to be, operating on their own. Very few CDMOs are making significant announcements of ex-U.S. CDMOs making U.S. investment. We've seen it with Celltrion, but they're buying a Lilly facility that one could charitably call distressed if you look it up. Samsung announced they were buying the Human Genome Sciences site from Merck or GSK, which means, converting a facility, not doing a greenfield change. But that's a small facility. That's nothing like what Samsung has in Korea. That said, we're recording on January 27th of 2026, and last night I got an email saying the president threatens to increase South Korea tariffs to 25% and add tariffs to pharmaceuticals coming from South Korea. I had no idea why. I could not think of what on earth they had done to incur this. Finally looked it up, and it's simply because their parliament had not ratified the trade deal with the U.S. in a fast enough time. And that apparently was enough to incur another Liberation Day style tariff announcement. One of the aspects of all that is that apparently the South Korean stock market did not respond to that in the slightest. No one took it that seriously, that the president of the United States was announcing a significant new tariff and, adding other categories to said tariffs.
The same thing, of course, happened the week before with 6 or 7 European nations over Greenland.
Yeah, but the Greenland thing was so fast moving and crazy. There's so many other aspects, like, is he going to do a tariff or send troops? That became a very hectic period, but that also resolved itself very, very quickly. Yeah, things are strange, and trying to stay on top of it all, figure out what investments you can make to expand in the U.S. and elsewhere, and what services and areas in which to go are a major challenge for the CDMO space as well as their clients, to be sure.
But it certainly seems that long-term, medium to long-term, having more people, more capacity, more facilities in the US feels like the long-term direction of travel. Curious to know how your members are solving particularly the workforce issue.
Well, that's one of my big concerns, is that the workforce that pharma needs to fill these sites that they're building is probably going to have to come from CDMOs. They're not going to be able to, form educational setups with local universities and community colleges with enough alacrity to staff these places. They're probably going to have to try to poach CDMO staff if these facilities actually go through. One of the things I was very gratified by, that somebody actually said it and put his name to it, in Endpoint's newsletter, a little bit after CPHI, the head of Recipharm said to a reporter from Endpoint's, within 10 years, 75% of these large pharma sites are going to be up for sale. So that's just going to be a opportunity for CDMOs. Ultimately, they're going to build these sites, get out of the tariff threat that they're under, but potentially 5-10 years from now, the market will have changed, and sites will be sold. And we've seen that historically within the sector. We've seen large pharma. Large pharma has historically been capable of spending billions to build a site intended for one product, and then never actually run the site because something happened with the product. And the idea that that's no longer the case is, nothing tells me that couldn't still happen here. So we might see significant investment in the U.S. coming from CDMOs a few years from now as they're acquiring some of these pharma sites, but we'll see where it goes.
Interesting. Just before the Christmas break, there was a lot of activity around MFN, Most Favored Nation. I think we're up to 14 companies now who've signed deals in exchange for getting a 3-year tariff exemption. What impact do you think MFN is making? And I guess both from a US point of view, but also on the wider global impact. In Europe, lots of the countries are under pressure to raise their prices. So the US is the lowest if prices in France, Germany, etc. increase. What's your take on what's happening?
And that's especially the case in the UK, where a number of pharmas have sounded like they are telling the UK, we won't sell drugs into your country unless you start paying more, which isn't a great look, but that's part of where that market is. One of the problems is the details of those MFN deals are not public. Nobody knows exactly what pharma has promised. Meanwhile, the president's healthcare proposal says that, beyond Medicare or Medicaid, where this is, these MFN prices are supposed to happen, it should be expanded to the private insurance world too, and make sure that, everybody's getting this exact same price. But Congress has said, we don't know what these prices are. Nobody has actually publicized what these deals entail. So no one knows, especially because of the weird opacity of the U.S. healthcare system. No one knows what the price is versus what the cost is.
It is complicated, isn't it, with the list prices?
Because, is it the list price? Is it the price with rebates? Is it, and there's a lot of different permutations as to what these are. One of the things that it does seem to have opened up is direct-to-consumer sales of certain prescription drugs, which is something that the GLP-1 drugs sort of pushed to the fore because some people are having trouble getting insurance coverage, but they could get a prescription, and Lilly and Novo were both offering a lower price basically for cash. If you were a consumer, you wanted to buy outside of your insurance, there was a process by which to do that. That's been opened up, or it seems to be opening up, for a number of other drugs. That said, those aren't the drivers of healthcare costs. Like, you're not buying Keytruda over the counter or direct from Merck. You're getting that in a hospital setting because you have cancer. So that's going to cost a lot more. That's not something you can just do consumers get to buy it without a insurance coverage sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of weird questions around this stuff. Nobody quite knows, again, what it's going to mean, what impact it's going to have on pharma, whether it's going to impact certain types of R&D decisions, the way the Inflation Reduction Act, which is was implemented during the Biden era, but is continuing to be used now because it's in the law. Potentially, I mean, it favors biologics over small molecule products. It also favors large market entry from the outset. That said, it disincentivizes getting a small patient population approval just to get on the market and then expanding with other trials as you go along. Mm-hmm. Because the moment you get on the market, the fuse is lit for when Medicare can begin negotiating prices with you. So you are no longer looking for a small patient population. You now want to make a hit right away from the beginning, to the point at which you might ignore small patient populations and how they might benefit from your drug. So those are some of the unintended consequences that hit the R&D side of things when it comes to drug pricing policy. And of course, those get down to the CDMO sector. If you were based on that model of, hey, we're going to start with you, the CDMO, as we start out with a smaller population, then we're going to scale up when we get this approval and that approval. That model seems to be under pressure at present because of the changes under the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. I've learned not to use IRA when I am talking to an international audience.
Yes.
I did it once on a conference call with Pfizer Global, and people were texting, why is he talking about Ireland? I'm like, oh, you don't know what our IRA is, and that's not a good thing. So
definitely in the UK and the island of Ireland, it has a very different connotation.
Yep. But all said, these things are what affects the license holder, the drug filer side of things in a very large scale way. And then, there's second and third tier effects when ultimately they get to the CDMOs. We can't control any of this stuff. And our job is to be there, as the manufacturer, as the development service provider, to be, there to support this whole thing, knowing that the models are changing at the same time that, we're still working our way through a lot of the financial tumultuousness of the COVID into post-COVID era. The change in interest rates really damaged the R&D investment side of things when it came to pharma. And that's something that the CDMO sector felt very, very acutely, as R&D money was pulled back because it was a riskier investment than just putting your money in a CD. It became very tough for CDMOs that relied on earlier stage pharma to get by.
So talking about the CDMO sector, talking about your members, how are they planning to navigate all of this, a year of volatility, and with all the pressures on drug pricing and tariffs? How does that impact the business model of CDMOs?
I think their goal is to stay flexible. We've seen several take on significant private equity funding in recent years, and in the past year especially. And I think part of that is to have more backing to be able to accommodate some of the volatility, both in terms of, again, R&D ups and downs, but also in investment. Are you investing in equipment that is going to cost 10% or 15% more than you thought it was when you started your capital plan? Or is it going to cost 50% more based on where the tariff situation ends up? It's another thing that we've tried to get across to the government, that much of the equipment that pharma uses for manufacturing, as well as a lot of consumables, come from overseas. And so volatility in terms of tariffs and pricing of that stuff can impact the drug supply chain security in the U.S. If our guys don't know, some of them might hold back on significant capital investments if they don't know what the equipment's actually going to cost. And increasing the costs of the actual day-to-day operations because certain key components now cost 50% more than you were planning on, is also something that can affect how CDMOs operate and how their customers license with, or how their customers contract with them.
From a purely commercial point of view, it certainly feels like there are, there's plenty of challenges, but there's also plenty of reasons to be optimistic for US manufacturing. So biotech funding, hopefully, is improving, reshoring momentum, separating head from heart, I suppose. How are you, or how are your members feeling about the year ahead from a commercial point of view?
I think people are optimistic, and they also know, as I said, predictions and quote unquote foreseeable future are not usable terms. I think they are building in flexibility. I think some of them have, significant business coming. Some of them, were very much hinging on early stage work and are still waiting to see funding come through consistently for that. At the same time, we mentioned possibilities in cell and gene therapies. There have also been a number of closures when it comes to cell and gene facilities owned by CDMOs because the market just has not caught up to where the science is. And it's something I've talked about with you in the past. It's over time, those cell and gene modalities will come through, but that maybe not fast enough for where investors thought they should, nor they'll also involve significant issues when it comes to paying for them for reimbursement within especially the U.S. healthcare market. And also in Europe, we've seen some cell therapies that cost too much basically for the UK to accept and thus aren't available in the UK. So, understanding or how to fix the economics of that space and, how to keep the infrastructure in place to survive a slower than expected process of developing market approval, getting these things cleared through the regulators is going to be a real challenge for sure. There's plenty still of good stuff out there still. Don't worry, guys are still doing okay. There's significant investment. We're seeing now with both the GLP-1 injectables, there's been significant manufacturing. The bottlenecks have opened up. Things that were displaced because of the GLP-1s are landing at other injectable CDMOs. And now with the potential for oral GLP-1s, that's going to be a potential market changer in terms of what services and what dosages and modalities are needed out there. But, we're here to support all that stuff, knowing that we're not the guys in charge. We don't own the drugs. We don't have the licenses, but, we're here to support as best we can. Good luck with it all. Good luck with the GDUFA negotiations, and also good luck with your blood pressure. It's going to be another frantic year, I'm afraid. There are, again, times like yesterday when I just see, South Korea, 25%. Wonder what that's about. So, that's sort of the world we're in now, where it's just kind of almost numb at certain points. But, we're helping our members, keeping our members informed, and also helping them advocate for, their position and making sure FDA, Department of Commerce, White House, state, all those people understand the role that we play and how to make sure that any policy they're trying to implement strengthens pharmaceutical infrastructure and doesn't inadvertently damage it all. Excellent. Thank you, Gil. Looking forward to speaking to you next in Rotterdam at CDMO Live Europe. Thanks for your time today. Can't wait, man. It's going to be great.